The tip of Aunt Vivian's manicured index finger trembled a fraction of an inch from my nose, the diamond cluster on her ring catching the warm light of the dining room chandelier. The scent of roasted sage and expensive wine suddenly felt thick and heavy in my lungs. 20 people stopped eating, forks hovering over porcelain plates. No one breathed. "Empty your purse," Aunt Vivian said. Her voice a strained whisper meant to carry to every corner of the room. "And hand Richard your car keys. We know you took it." I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, my chair wedged between a drafty bay window and a sticky high chair belonging to a distant cousin. I did not blink. I did not stammer a frantic defense or let the familiar heat of public humiliation rise to my cheeks. I kept my hands flat on the white linen tablecloth, feeling the stiff weave of the fabric beneath my fingertips. My Uncle Richard sat rigid across the room, his knuckles white around the stem of his wine glass. My cousin Ashley wore a practiced look of shock, but her eyes held a distinct shine of satisfaction. They waited for me to crumble. For 15 years, I had been their convenient charity case, the designated scapegoat whenever their curated reality cracked. My leather tote bag rested on the hardwood floor by my boots. Inside that bag sat a crisp, folded sheet of paper that would soon turn this pristine holiday gathering into a smoldering crater. Welcome back to Aura Vengeance, where quiet boundaries dismantle loud arrogance. If you have ever sat at a family table and absorbed the blame for a mess you did not make, this story belongs to you. How old are you? And have you ever had to walk away from the people who raised you? Drop your age in the comments and be sure to subscribe. To understand why I did not cry when my own family called me a thief, you have to rewind 24 hours. I was standing in my high-rise office in downtown Boston. I'm 32 years old, and I am a senior forensic accountant. My family thinks I am a struggling administrative assistant, that I balance small business ledgers to make my rent. I let them believe this because the truth is much more complicated. I track hidden assets for high-net-worth divorces, and I investigate corporate fraud. I find the money people try to bury. I reached into my coat pocket and ran my thumb over the cold metal edge of a silver appraisal loop. It belonged to my grandmother. When I was 10 years old, she taught me how to hold it to the light. "People will always try to sell you silver-plated lies, Gianna," she would tell me. "You have to look at the hallmark." That small, magnifying glass grounded me. It was the only real thing left of her. My family thought I was driving to Concord just for turkey and stuffing. They did not know the estate attorney managing my grandmother's lingering trust had hired my firm a month ago. Uncle Richard was the executor of the estate, and he had been missing critical filing deadlines. The court was asking questions. I had been quietly tracking Richard and his shell companies for weeks. I already knew exactly what he did. I was not walking into a family dinner as a victim. I was an investigator waiting for my target to trip the wire. I arrived at the colonial estate at 3 in the afternoon. The Massachusetts air was bitter and smelled of wood smoke. I carried 2 homemade bourbon pecan pies up the brick steps, a tradition I kept for my grandmother. Ashley met me in the foyer. She wore a tailored cashmere dress and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, you baked," she said, her tone the audible equivalent of a polite sigh. "Put those in the garage fridge, Gianna. We need the kitchen space for the catered pastries." I did not argue. I walked through the kitchen and placed my pies next to half-empty soda bottles in the freezing garage. The real effort was hidden away while the expensive fake display took center stage. When I walked back inside the house, the chaos had already begun. Vivian was pacing the hallway. A silver serving spoon was missing from the heirloom chest. She was raising her voice at the hired catering staff, blaming them for the misplacement. But I did not watch Vivian. I watched Richard. He stood near the staircase, staring down at his glowing phone screen. He hit decline. I caught a glimpse of the caller ID. It was a commercial debt collection agency. He was sweating through his cashmere shirt. The trap was set. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the 24th floor, overlooking the Boston Harbor. It was Wednesday afternoon. Exactly 24 hours before Aunt Vivian would point her trembling finger at my face across a Thanksgiving turkey. The firm was mostly empty. The junior accountants had already left for the long holiday weekend. I sat alone at my mahogany desk, bathed in the pale blue glow of two oversized computer monitors. My family believed I spent my days filing receipts for a mid-level paper supply company. They needed to believe I was small because their own egos required a baseline of comparison. The truth was, I managed the forensic accounting division for one of the most ruthless financial investigative firms in New England. I did not file receipts. I found them. I tracked offshore shell companies for high-net-worth divorce settlements. I uncovered embezzled corporate funds. I hunted the money that desperate people tried very hard to bury. Forensic accounting is not about math. It is about human behavior. A liar will always construct a narrative to hide their panic. But their bank statements will always tell the cold, hard truth. A thick manila folder rested on my desk. The label on the tab simply read, Estate of Beatrice James. Beatrice was my grandmother. She was the original owner of the Concord estate where Vivian and Richard now lived. She was also the only person in my family who ever looked at me and saw someone worth building up. When she passed away 2 years ago, she named Uncle Richard the executor of her estate. It was a traditional choice. The eldest son takes the reins, but Richard had spent 18 months dodging the probate court. He missed filing deadlines. He claimed the estate assets were tied up in complex appraisals. A month ago, the estate attorney called my direct line. His name was Harrison, and he was an old friend of my grandmother. He knew what I did for a living. He sat in my office and slid that manila folder across my desk. He told me Richard was stonewalling the final distribution of the trust. Harrison suspected Richard was hiding something, but he lacked the forensic tools to pierce the veil of Richard's corporate LLCs. I took the case off the books. I spent 3 weeks following the digital breadcrumbs my uncle left behind. Richard was a man who performed wealth. He drove a leased luxury SUV and bought Ashley designer clothes to project an image of untouchable success. But the spreadsheets on my monitor painted the portrait of a drowning man. His commercial real estate venture was bleeding cash. His anchor tenant had broken their lease 6 months ago. To cover the shortfall, Richard had quietly leveraged the secondary trust account. He was desperate for liquid cash to stave off a margin call that would expose his functional bankruptcy. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a small brass and glass silver appraisal loop. I set it on the glass surface of my desk. The metal was heavy and cool to the touch. When I was 10 years old, my grandmother taught me that the hallmark on a piece of silver was its true identity. It was the tiny stamp that told you if something was real or just a convincing imitation. I had learned to search for those hallmarks in people too. They had spent 15 years treating me like a stray dog begging for scraps. Now they realized I was the one holding the leash. Vivian took a step toward me. The fierce, unyielding certainty in her eyes had been replaced by a frantic, darting panic. The ground beneath her feet was dissolving, and she could not figure out how to stop it. "Gianna," she said, her voice thin and reedy, "I do not care about Harrison. I do not care about your accounting firm. You are trying to confuse us. You were standing by the credenza. Ashley saw you. You took the velvet box. Open your bag." I finally turned to look at my aunt. I felt a fleeting trace of pity for her. She had built her entire identity around the success of her husband. She wore his fabricated wealth like a suit of armor. She had no idea the armor was made of paper. "I will not be opening my purse, Vivian," I said. My voice was gentle but unbending. "I do not need to empty my bag to prove my innocence." "Why not?" she demanded, her pitch rising into a shrill note. "Because I already know exactly where the heirloom silver is," I replied. "I know exactly what time it left this house. I know exactly how much it sold for. And I know the name of the man who sold it." I reached down and picked up my leather tote bag from the hardwood floor. The heavy brass clasp jingled softly in the quiet room. I unzipped the top compartment. The audience of relatives leaned forward, their eyes wide with morbid anticipation. The truth was armed, it was aimed, and it was time to pull the trigger. I reached my hand into the dark interior of my leather tote bag. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint friction of my wool sleeve brushing against the brass zipper. I bypassed my wallet. I bypassed my car keys. My fingers searched the bottom of the bag until they found the smooth, heavy stock paper waiting there. I pulled the object out into the warm chandelier light. It was a crisp white envelope. Embossed in the upper left corner was a silver crest belonging to a luxury antique dealer located on Newbury Street, a shop known to the quiet circles of Boston elites who required swift discretion more than they required a fair appraisal. I held the envelope between my thumb and index finger. I did not stand up to hand it to Vivian. I did not walk around the table. I set the pristine paper flat on the polished mahogany surface. I gave it a firm, deliberate push. The thick envelope glided across the smooth wood. It bypassed the crystal wine glasses. It slid past the roasted turkey and the bowls of untouched side dishes. It came to a perfect halt exactly 1 inch from the edge of Vivian's porcelain dinner plate. Vivian stared down at it for a fraction of a second. Her ingrained superiority held firm. She assumed it was a pawn shop ticket. She assumed it was my written confession or a desperate plea for forgiveness. Her lips curled into a tight, triumphant sneer. She reached out with her manicured fingers and snatched the envelope off the table. "The heirloom collection is not in the trunk of my car, Vivian," I said. My voice remained at a steady conversational volume, forcing the distant relatives to strain their ears to hear me. "The silver was sold on Tuesday afternoon," I continued. "It was appraised at $30,000, but the seller was in a profound hurry. He accepted a rushed cash buyout of $14,000. Vivian stopped tearing at the flap. The sneer on her face faltered. $14,000 was not a number associated with a quick credit card fix or a missed rent payment. It was a substantial sum of liquid cash. Her hands hesitated. She pulled the folded document from the envelope. It was a detailed, itemized bill of sale. In my line of work, you learn that thieves rarely steal for the thrill of luxury. They steal to plug a hole in a sinking ship. My grandmother Beatrice had spent a lifetime collecting those ornate serving trays and slotted spoons. She polished them every Sunday afternoon. She believed they would sit on this exact dining table long after she was gone. She never imagined her legacy would be traded away to cover a fraction of a commercial margin call by her own son. Vivian scanned the top of the page. Her eyes darted back and forth across the printed text. I watched the cognitive dissonance wage a fierce war behind her eyes. She read the detailed description of the items, the ornate gravy boat, the velvet-lined mahogany box, the exact match to her mother's cherished collection. "Read the bottom line." "Vivian," I said. She did not look up. Her hands began to shake holding the crisp paper. The tremor traveled up her slender wrists and into her tense shoulders. The paper rattled softly in the quiet room. "Read the signature on the seller line." I instructed. My tone allowed zero room for negotiation. "Tell the table who signed away the silver." Vivian opened her mouth. Her lips parted, but she could not find her breath. She looked like a woman who had just stepped off a high ledge and was waiting for the ground to rush up to meet her. The protective fortress of her reality was crumbling beneath her designer shoes. "Who is it?" Vivian asked. Her voice tight with morbid curiosity. Vivian swallowed hard. The muscles in her neck strained. She lowered the paper a few inches. She turned her head slowly, shifting her gaze from the printed document to the man sitting in the center seat of honor. "Richard," she whispered. It was a fragile, broken sound. The name left her lips and drifted across the dining room like a ghost. The reaction was instantaneous. 20 heads snapped toward the middle of the table. Every set of eyes locked onto the patriarch. The extended relatives stared at the man who had spent the last hour projecting untouchable wealth and moral superiority. Ashley, who had been so quick to condemn me, now looked utterly lost. Her face was pale. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. Her father, her hero, the source of her perceived status, was a thief. Her country club wedding, her designer clothes, her entire identity, built on a foundation of sand, was collapsing. Yes. Richard did not elevate his daughter. He hollowed her out. He handed her a cubic zirconia pendant and told her she was wearing a diamond. He raised a child with zero emotional awareness. Someone who fundamentally believed that her worth was tied to her father's bank account. When that bank account was exposed as a mirage, Ashley did not just lose her country club wedding. She lost her entire identity. She was left weeping at a dining room table, entirely unequipped to handle the harsh, unforgiving light of the truth. That is the ultimate betrayal of the parental duty. When you raise a child in a house built on deception, you guarantee that they will eventually be crushed when the roof caves in. Contrast that with the quiet, enduring legacy of my grandmother Beatrice. She did not teach me how to project false wealth. She did not teach me how to look down on others to make myself feel taller. She sat me at her kitchen table and handed me a heavy brass appraisal loop. She taught me how to look past the shiny, silver-plated exterior of the world and search for the hallmark of authenticity. She provided the kind of long-term guidance that traditional family structures are meant to foster. She understood that fairness and honesty are not just abstract concepts to be discussed on Sunday mornings. They are the very tools required for survival. Beatrice gave me the emotional awareness to recognize my own worth, even when the rest of the family tried to relegate me to the drafty corners of their lives. That is what true inheritance looks like. It is not a gravy boat. It is not a trust fund. It is the unshakable internal compass that allows you to stand perfectly still in a room full of screaming people, knowing that your reality is anchored in the truth. Raising children with this kind of emotional awareness requires parents to do the hardest work of all. It requires them to be honest with themselves. It demands that a patriarch admit when he has failed rather than embezzling from his family to maintain a facade. It demands that a matriarch foster fairness between all members of the household rather than creating a toxic dynamic of golden children and designated scapegoats. When parents project their own insecurities onto their children, they create an echo chamber of anxiety and resentment. They teach their children to value the performance of success over the quiet dignity of integrity. We tell all these stories not just to revel in the spectacular downfall of arrogant people. We tell them because they serve as a mirror to our own lives, our own dining room tables, and our own parenting choices. We share these experiences to break the cycles of generational toxicity that hide behind the polished oak doors of supposedly perfect homes. We want to empower you to look at the dynamics in your own life and ask the hard, necessary questions about what you are accepting, what you are ignoring, and what you are passing down to the next generation. If you have ever felt like the scapegoat in your own family, if you have ever had to quietly hold on to the truth while the people who were supposed to protect you spun a web of lies, you are not alone. There is a profound strength in quiet observation. There is immense power in refusing to accept an abuser's premise. We invite you to continue exploring these themes with us. Follow the channel Aura Vengeance, where we dissect the quiet boundaries that dismantle loud arrogance. Subscribe to our community, share your own stories in the comments, and join us as we continue to shine a light on the hidden truths of family dynamics. As I drove further away from Concord, the glow of the city lights reflecting off the snow-covered highway, I thought about the empty velvet box sitting on the mahogany credenza. I thought about the families all across the country gathering around their own tables, passing dishes, exchanging smiles, and hiding their own quiet resentments beneath the polite chatter. We all inherit something. Some of us inherit debts. Some of us inherit trauma. And some of us are lucky enough to inherit a brass magnifying glass that helps us see the world clearly. The question we are ultimately left with is not about what was handed to us. The question is what we choose to do with it when the guests leave, when the candles burn down, and when the performative noise of the holiday fades into the silent winter night. You have to sit alone with the reality you have built. You have to look at the reflection in the dark window pane. Is the life you are living real all the way through? Or is it just another silver-plated lie waiting for the hallmark to fade?